Hi, everyone. Welcome to People Plus Places. I'm Adrian Scott Fine. I have the great privilege of serving as the president and CEO for the Los Angeles Conservancy. We're happy to have you here today for People Plus Places, fast cars, architecture, and neo-noir action thrills. So it's a mouthful, but happy you're here. Again, People Plus Places, it's a reoccurring program of the Los Angeles Conservancy. And today we're doing something a little fun, a sort of a crossover to our Last Remaining Seats program, where we show classic films in classic historic theaters. And today we realized, because of the three films that we're showing among our overall set as part of Last Remaining Seats, at least three of them have car connections, especially with Bullitt, that we're showing on June 8th at the LA Theater. And then we're going to be showing From Russia with Love with an incredible, beautiful Aston Martin and VIDA LOCA on June 15th at the Palace Theater, which also has an amazing collection of lowriders. So cars are part of the connection with Last Remaining Seats. So we wanted to have a little sneak peek, specifically looking at the Bullitt film, and also talk about, well, how does car culture intersect with architecture and places, and also a place like LA, which is fundamentally rooted into the whole idea of cars and its sort of its origin story, certainly in terms of its growth and expansion. So, and we're fortunate enough to have three folks here with us today. So I'm going to ask them to go ahead and join us on the screen here. We've got Aaron Gold with MotorTrend, Bobby Green with the 1933 group, and then we've got Michael Spellman, who is an actor and also amazingly is the owner of one of the Bullitt Mustangs that exist out there today. So welcome, guys. This is definitely going to be a lot of cars and guys. So probably we could be a little more diverse, but we'll work on that. But go ahead and ask each gentleman to please introduce yourself, a little bit of brief background, and for fun, what was your first car? So let's start with Aaron.
My name is Aaron Gold. I'm a senior editor with MotorTrend, the magazine and the website, and native New Yorker. Been in LA, gosh, almost 30 years. And I'm kind of ashamed because I'm in the car business. I'm kind of ashamed to say that my first car was a 1982 Plymouth Reliant K car, which could not get out of its own way. But as I tell everybody who asks, it was all uphill from there.
Nice. Welcome, Aaron. How about Bobby?
Bobby Green, 1933 group and Old Crow Speed Shop. My first car, I turned 16. I bought a 57 Chevy Bel Air, custom. It was lowered and shaved and a bunch of custom work to it. So I got started early in the Southern California custom hot rod scene at the age of 16.
Great. And is also a lover of all things architecture and places, and we'll talk more about that, certainly with the 1933 group and places that you have helped make sure still stand and are operating today. Michael.
Hey, I'm Michael Spellman from Detroit, Michigan, originally. So gas guzzling muscle cars are kind of it's kind of my birthright. I come from a family of auto workers. My first car was a 1966 Ford Mustang. My brother and my dad were both engineers at Chrysler, and so that was a little bit of a rough going as far as me wanting a Mustang and them working for Chrysler. So I had my eyes on a car. My dad said, come up with money and I'll match it. And so we picked up a 1966 Mustang Coupe. It's still in the family. My cousin has it now for his daughter, so it's her first car. But yeah, I've been in LA 20 years. I'm an actor and a car enthusiast. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for being here. You definitely won the lottery in terms of first cars. And I'll share too. Mine was a 1983 Nissan 200 SX. So you know, it worked. Okay, let's just dive in a little bit. This idea, you know, that we're looking at as car culture, but cars and intersecting with places. And I know, I don't know about you, Michael, but I do know about Aaron and Bobby. You also like architecture and old places. So, you know, how did this come together? Why, what drives you, not, no pun intended there, but in terms of cars and places, why do you do this? Why do you care? So maybe whoever wants to answer, but maybe Bobby, you certainly have probably gone the farthest in terms of this connection between places and certainly cars too.
Well, you know, I think it's a very Los Angeles story, because my family moved here. I was 10 years old. This is 1980, and we came from Oklahoma, very flat, somewhat boring place to live. And when you land in Los Angeles, and you're just inundated with this visuals all around you, not only the cars that are driving the streets, but the buildings and the streets themselves, and you really start wondering what is with this city. It is so different than every other city in the country. And then you really start learning that the automobile is what shaped this entire city. And then when you really start diving into history and you really start looking at places that don't exist anymore, you suddenly learn that LA is not only a very young city, but it's a very automotive city. And so I've had a love affair with LA ever since I first saw it.
Nice.
And we'll get into programmatic architecture in a bit. I just want to warm up to it. It's a pretty heavy thing to lay on people.
You know, I kind of have the opposite almost. I'm a native New Yorker, and I hate to sound like a New York snob, but I've struggled for almost 30 years to kind of find the soul of Los Angeles. And there's so much that I miss in the, you know, I go back east and I miss the big hulking buildings, but and things like that. But it was really working with the Conservancy on some of the stories that made me realize, as I think I've told you, Adrian, you know, I realized I was missing the trees for the forest. And there's just so many individual, beautiful, amazing buildings in Los Angeles. And that's what I've come to appreciate about the city. You know, where else can you say, you can live someplace for nearly 3 decades and then drive someplace and see something you've absolutely never seen before. And of course, from a car perspective, I mean, this place is absolute heaven, because back east in New York, and I lived down near the city, and I spent high school and college in Rochester, which is in the Rust Belt. And a car is very much a finite item, because the rust is going to kill the car. Cars don't last forever. But out here, this is automotive heaven, where sheet metal lasts forever. And you'll see the most oddball things that have just survived because nothing rusts, you know. And if you can keep changing the oil, you can keep a car forever. And that intersection of the two, how car dependent Los Angeles is, has just made it absolute heaven for me.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting, Aaron, also you live in a place that the Conservancy has had a long active involvement with Chase Knowles in Sherman Oaks, which was threatened at one point with complete demolition, and it was a long-standing advocacy issue that we've been involved with. So it's interesting, all these various connections that we all have. But yeah, cars all bring us together. And I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to add anything more to that or not, or also.
I mean, just like I said, being from Detroit and my father working for Chrysler, there was always something interesting in the driveway. He would bring cars home from work. I learned how to drive stick shift on a 93 Dodge Viper. It was very young, underage as well. So, and just Detroit being, you know, it's the Paris of the Midwest at one point in time, and it was designed by Lafayette. So the architecture there, I'm still in love with it. I love that city. It is my favorite city, but LA is a close second. So I just kind of fell into the love of all things automotive design, architecture. So it just comes from my background as well.
Cool. And I will, since someone's already started, feel free in the chat if you want to share your first car too, or your favorite place or connection with cars and places, please feel free. And then also, if you have questions for any of these guys this week, we will definitely have time for kind of Q&A at the end here, but please feel free to add those into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Why don't we shift to part of the reason we're here, which is the Bullitt film. So like I said, we're showing this at our last remaining seats, and I know it's in the chat for those that maybe don't know about the film or aren't planning to go already, and those that are, thank you for doing that. But we'll be showing it on June 8th as the matinee. I think it's our top seller right now. So there you go. There's a lot of fans for Bullitt to want to see it. But for those that don't know it, it's this kind of classic neo-noir action thriller with this legendary car chase that is traditionally seen as being one of the best car chases in any type of action film ever, produced in 1968. So, and it's kind of the standard. So, and part of its story is it's this long car chase, and I'll show a little clip of it here, is there's no dialogue. And then the best part of, and you'll see two of the guys driving this Dodge Charger, they never talk. And that's part of the greatness, I think, of this piece, in terms of all you hear is this great music and this throaty sound of these engines revving and chasing after one another in terms of this sequence. But why don't we show a little clip of it, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it means to you all. So just 1 second. Let me share. Break it up. It's hard not to keep wanting to watch that.
And see how many times you spot the green beetle, which is
we're going to talk about that beetle.
Thing.
We're definitely talking about the beetle. Yeah, so I'll ask you all. I have my opinion about what makes this such a great, classic car chase, in part because of its, the place where it's filmed. But what about you? What is it that you think makes this a standout? Because there's a lot of car chase films out there, but this is, again, seen as one of the best.
Well, for me, I think it's.
I think Aaron.
Bobby, you go ahead.
I think something Aaron mentioned before is it's the sound. It's the lack of the dum da dum da dum music playing in the background, the lack of dialogue, and all you're hearing is the engine revving and the tires screeching. I think that is what it's. It's the less is more feeling with the race.
I love the purity of it. It's not just about wrecking the cars. There's nothing wrong with a good smash 'em up car chase. Original Gone in 60 Seconds is one of my favorites, but it's such a brilliant continuity of the movie. This is not so much about the cars. It's person versus person. And I love how they use the cars and the motion of the cars and how they drive the cars as extensions of the characters in the film.
I think it's Stephen.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's McQueen. I think, but yeah, the cars are. That's the interesting thing about it, is the cars are actors in the film. They play a huge part about it. And you know, the double clutching through the whole. I've heard rumors that it is a soundtrack. They took a GT40 or something and they overlaid it, but the fact that it is just cars and you know, there's no music, because Layla Schifrin did the soundtrack and it's beautiful, but that was the point where it stopped and it just let the cars kind of take over. And then the city of San Francisco, obviously, as the background is, it just makes for a perfect, I don't know, perfect cinematic experience, I think.
And I'll tell you something else I love about it is kind of there's some imperfections in it. You know, we saw the scene where Steve McQueen misses the turn and has to jam the car in reverse, and you see the axle tramping around. And then when he, you know, doesn't he spin the car when the motorcycle goes over? And you know, like you know, in today's movies, it's all CGI and every car moves perfectly. But no, Steve McQueen actually spun the Mustang and lost a little time in coming after the Charger. I love the imperfection and the humanity of it. It almost feels like, yeah, in that situation, maybe you could have done something similar to that, you know?
Well, it's raw. You know, you couldn't do what they did today because of all the regulations and the rules. They basically got the San Francisco Police Department in their back pocket. They wanted to bring a movie in, and they had guys on the corners like directing traffic, but there were people I mean, it wasn't like a lockdown like you would have nowadays. And yeah, there was stunt, you know, Kerry Lofton, I think, was the stunt coordinator, and we had Bud Eakins did a lot of the driving. But like you said, that scene where Steve misses the turn and he does the wheel hop, he sticks his head out the window because he wanted everybody to know, hey, I'm driving this. I don't want people to think that there's a stunt driver, even though there was a lot of Bud Eakins driving. So I just think you couldn't redo it today. People they've tried, but it was in a time period where they got away with a lot of stuff, as you guys know from being in this film world.
There were a lot less lawyers at that time than there are now. And you know, and you're right about the location, you know, because you can get the jumps and you get that visual coming over the hills, and you almost get a feeling like if you don't stop, you're going to end up in the ocean,
right?
You know, all the way to Alcatraz. You had mentioned if they'd ever filmed that in Los Angeles, where would they film it? And honestly, I mean, you know, maybe around the Bunker Hill area, would you get some hill action and you get some tunnel driving through downtown? But otherwise, it would have to just be through Hollywood, where you see some icons of LA, but it would never be the same.
It wouldn't be the same.
Well, you also think about the time period. So I don't know, it was probably filmed in 67, released in 68. So if you look at Bunker Hill, that's right when Bunker Hill, there wasn't much left of the Victorian neighborhood. It was all still going through the urban renewal. There's a few holdouts, but that could have been pretty cool scene. And it's the only place where you have that topography and kind of vistas that you could replicate in terms of what they were doing with this film, which I really do think San Francisco is like a supporting character in terms of it's the Mustang, it's the Charger, and it's the city. In terms of if you didn't have those vistas and the cars jumping, you know, these hills in that way, it wouldn't have been the same experience.
100%.
Although if you do want to see an amazing LA car chase, not necessarily a chase, more of an LA car run. The 1930s, this is kind of odd, but the movie You Ought to Be in Pictures, there's a scene where Porky Pig is driving, he's put into an actual filmed scene where he's racing down Sunset Boulevard to get to the studios. And it must have been filmed on a motorcycle or a scooter, because I mean it's a terrifying drive, and it's, you know, real cars, early 30s, and then they have the cartoon Porky Pig and his roadster running through town. So Google Porky Pig, You Ought to Be in Pictures, and it's a pretty exciting. I post it on my socials, you know, about once a year. People just love it.
Well, that's awesome.
You learn something new every day. I didn't know about that one at all. But Bobby, you touched on something earlier, and that's the green VW Beetle. And yeah, I'm partial to VW Beetles, but so just for some background, so Bullitt was produced by Warner Brothers. It was a box office success, and it was nominated for, I think, Best Sound and Best Film Editing. It did not win for sound, although I think it's right up there, but it did win for film editing. However, if there's one flaw with this car chase, and for those that are coming to see the screening on the the big screen at the LA theater on June 8th, you'll see it multiple times. Is this it's glacially slow VW Beetle, and granted they don't move fast, but there's never been a VW that has driven more slowly than this one, and it's at least 3, maybe 4 times that they use the same kind of clip showing the Mustang and the Charger going by this, little poor pokey little VW Beetle. So that's one problem.
I think they just had one shot. Like they could do it a couple times, and that was it. And that's why you see, like, for the hubcaps,
I was just going to mention the hubcaps. I love it. I think the Charger loses a total of 5 hubcaps.
5 or 6, and then there's like 3 at the end. So you can see it keeps losing them when it misses the gas. I don't want to give away the people who haven't seen it, but when it misses that, it literally flies by the gas station, and which is another editing mistake. And then I think 3 of them pop off again at the end. But there's a lot of really cool mistakes. One of my favorite mistakes in the movie is, I mean, I don't know as far as giving away the story, but when they're babysitting the witness, and it's the other guy, I think it's Carl Reindel, I think is his name. He's got duties overnight to babysit the witness, and he gets shot. Steve McQueen comes in, and they're loading the body into, like, he's injured, and they're loading it into the ambulance. They forget to open the doors for the ambulance. They had rehearsed it, and somebody forgot to. So there's a scene where he goes, like, the take that they used, the extras or whatever, carrying the body mover, which is before gurneys, and they get to the thing, and then they're like, they don't know what to do, so they stopped, and you can hear them go, uh-oh, somebody forgot to open the door or whatever. And Steve, right away, without even missing a beat, just opens it up, and then they, shuffle it inside. And that was because it was real. It seemed real because they used real cops, real doctors. That was the other thing that makes the movie so great, is they used real people in the background. The architect's office, it was real architects, that were there, setting the scenes. It's not something you really encounter nowadays, I think. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting little mistakes that end up making it even kind of more of a treasure of a film, I think.
I love the hubcap one.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps the cars like Christine, the Stephen King movie, it regenerates itself.
Right.
And it loses one, it just grows a new one.
Well, I wouldn't expect you guys to know this as Ford guys, but Chrysler did have an option, code HFC, that automatically replaced the hubcap when it fell off. You just had to fill up. You kept 10 of them in the trunk. You didn't know about that? The automatic hubcap replacer on the Charger? Oh yeah.
I was
very
never
rare option. Couldn't get it with the automatic transmission. Very rare option.
Learning all kinds of interesting things. Okay, let me switch to gear a little bit to Michael. So Michael, you have I don't know if you call it a replica. It's not the real Bullitt
replica,
Mustang.
Tribute. Yeah, there's
look-alike.
I call it my daily driver, so it is
daily driver. So if you see him around, but you have a 68. Is that right?
Yeah, 68 Mustang GT and original Highland Green deluxe interior. I acquired it in 2007. It was the first thing I'd ever bought on eBay. It was the result of a drunken sushi date. And I remember telling this date about this car. I'm like, oh, I'm looking at this car on eBay. And I think I got to the point where I put a bid on it before retiring to sleep for the night, and woke up and I had won it. So there it was. And I lucked out. What attracted me to it, it was unlike the movie cars, there were 2 movie cars, original film cars, built in the San Jose plant. This was from Dearborn, so I had a little piece of home. I preferred it that way. So it was a Dearborn built GT, and it was Highland Green. But the best part is it spent its entire life on the West Coast. Literally, the person that bought it lived in the Detroit area. It was a Detroit ordering code, and they ended up moving to Washington State, and it stayed there. And so there was like no rust on it. I lucked out because if you buy a car online, and I was young, I was I didn't know any better. And so I would have done my due diligence, but I didn't. And I got lucky. So it was a solid car, Highland Green. And then it wasn't until I acquired the license plates, the famous JJZ 109, and that was 2009, that I went full Bullitt, took off the C stripes, relocated the antenna, and did all the little movie touches to the car. So
Now, Michael, how did you tell us about how you ended up with these license plates?
well, it was very carefully. As a friend of mine said, he's like, Spellman, I know you went to college, but that's the smartest thing you ever did. They weren't taken. They weren't registered with the DMV. Somebody just overlooked it. And it just
That's remarkable.
So yeah, back in the day, the studios would get stacks of real license plates from the DMV, and they would just put them on cars. And apparently the story goes, Steve was flipping through plates, or whoever the production designer was, and they thought, all right, these are great. So JJZ 109, if you look at it from a historical aspect, it wouldn't have technically been assigned to a 1968 car. By 1968, though, it would have been like a Y or an X, 3 letters, 3 numbers. So it's a little out of place because of that, but because we're running out of numbers here. This is before they did the legacy program here in California. Now you can buy a new car and get black and yellow plates, but they're the original, like the 6 or 7 digits. I got in there before they made the rule that you couldn't do 3 letters and 3 numbers, and they put them into circulation. So it just worked out. And I remember thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. And then 3 months later, I get the tags in the mail from the DMV, like, Claire, you're good to go. Like, so they were happy to put them into circulation again. So
nice work. And can you
happy accident.
Can you get those on a black plate or a yellow plate?
No, you can't. If you were to buy a new vehicle now and get a personalized plate with the black and yellow, the DMV will not let you do 3 letters and 3 numbers. And you cannot do 3 numbers and 3 letters, because that was during the 70s up until the 80s, where they reversed it, and then they were the blue plates. If it mimicked an older plate, you couldn't do that.
Did you have some made though? Did you have some of the vintage plates made with that number?
Yeah. So I have some, but yeah, it worked. It just was like a happy accident, basically. So
very cool.
Yeah.
And for those that are coming to the film to see the screening of Bullitt, we'll have the car there, so it'll be out front. And Michael, I think you're going to be there as well, correct?
Yeah.
Well, if your car's there, you're there.
Yeah.
Just great. Thank you for doing that. And then maybe briefly, can you just share the story? Because it's interesting. Everything's been focused on the Mustang, not very much on the Dodge Charger, but maybe for good reason. But there is a little interesting story in terms of the original Bullitt, or at least one of the original Bullits that was discovered and then sold at a very high price point recently.
Yeah, I think, the original Mustangs, if you're a car person at all, it's folklore. It was kind of this ethereal thing. Like, everybody, what happened to the Bullitt Mustang? I know Dave Kuntz, who's ABC7, the automotive specialist, like, he kind of dove into it like back in the early 2000s, and kind of knew where it was, that it was, rumors it was hidden in a barn in Kentucky, and that ended up being mostly true. It was a family, a guy named Robert Kiernan bought the car. He saw it in a newspaper ad, like an auto trader, and I think he paid somewhere around $6,000 for the car. It was listed, and a police detective had bought it right after the movie ended. Because what happened was, I think there were 2 cars, 558 and 559 were the serial numbers, and the car ended up in the secretarial pool. One of them. The other one was trashed. It was the jump car, and it was just beyond repair. Ended up in a junkyard. But the hero car ended up being restored or put back together. Ended up in some secretary drove it, and then a detective on the East Coast, somewhere in New Jersey, I think, bought the car, drove it for a little while, put it up for sale. This guy, Robert Kiernan, was looking through it. A magazine saw it for sale, Hemmings or whatever magazine and ended up purchasing it. They drove it as their daily driver. I think his wife was a school teacher. I believe the story goes. She drove it back and forth to school. They put their 2 Great Dane dogs in the back of it. The interior was all scratched up. I mean, they didn't, it was a, you know, it was a family car for them. And then I think something happened where the clutch went out in like 1980 and they parked it. And it sat there and it just, the mystery grew around what happened to the car. And eventually, Sean Kiernan, who is the heir, the father sadly passed away, and Sean inherited it and basically felt it should be shared with the world. So he contacted Ford, and then the auto show in Detroit in 2018, they had a big debut because it coincided with their Bullitt tribute. So Ford did a couple tributes in 2001, 2008, and then 2018 tribute models of the Bullitt Mustang. So they shared it with the world, and then it eventually went to auction, where it was sold for an obscene amount of money to a mysterious buyer. So my car is not that car, just to be clear. Just a tribute.
I'm going to put in the chat right now. It's a piece that actually just came out called "The Greatest Car Chases in Movie History," and ranking different films, including Bullitt, is right up there. I'd just be curious from the group here. There's a lot of great films in there. That if there's one that really stands out, and I will say again, most of these films have a real strong connection to place. And certainly some of my favorites on the list, but I'd just be curious from Aaron or Bobby or Michael, any others other than Bullitt that really stand out.
Well, I agree with the list. I think Ronin is one of the greatest car chase scenes of a film, although it is a little, it is a little gimmicky. There's that scene where the truck stops short and then like 10 seconds later, the car, that little Peugeot falls off the top. But actually, I just rewatched the 7-Ups car chase just this weekend. And I think the 7-Ups chase is highly underrated, despite the fact that it's a bit of a Pontiac infomercial. Everybody's driving a 73 Pontiac. It has so many of the elements of the Bullitt chase. For obvious reasons, there are connections there. And of course, you got, Bill Hickman, who's the bad guy, actor and stunt driver who's driving the bad guy car in both of them. But does a little bit of smashing up, and which is always fun to see, but has a lot of that same tension of the Bullitt chase. I really like that chase a lot. And of course, the ending of that chase is just spectacular and yet somehow believable.
Yeah. No, it's good. And maybe we'll show a little clip from that one in just a second.
Adrian, I'm guessing Porky Pig and You Ought to Be in Pictures is not on this list.
I think
it's not, surprisingly. Somehow it didn't make the list. I don't know.
I am shocked. I am absolutely shocked. I
can't wait to see that, by the way. I can't wait to look at that.
Yeah.
Mel Blanc is rolling over in his grave right now.
It's so good. Where I see some of the best LA chases are the shows Chips,
Yeah.
Chips had some great ones. The A-Team had some great ones. You could probably do a huge list on episodes of 70s, 80s TV shows.
Well, and people have been chiming in terms of like Rockford Files is another great classic 70s, lots of car chases in that Firebird. I grew up watching Chips, and that's part of the reason I kind of fell in love with LA, even though I was from the Midwest, is just for all those freeway pileups and car chases and unbelievable kinds of things in terms of that. But yeah, the other one that stands out for me whenever I think of this in terms of a film genre, but also a place, is Duel, in terms of that like desert situation. And it has that same kind of thing in terms of Bullitt is like, you see the people in Bullitt in terms of the guys in the Charger, but they never say anything. In Duel, you never know who's in the truck. And that's part of the kind of allure of it, but also just this classic prolonged car chase, I think, is just, expertly executed in terms of that. But you mentioned, Aaron, 7-Ups. Why don't we show a short little clip of that? Because I agree. And it's also another one. It came a little bit after Bullitt, same film producer. And it also uses, in this case, New York and one of the interstate parkways is really kind of the setting for the film. So let me share this, and hopefully we won't have any more YouTube ads, but we'll see. One more try. Oops. One more try. Sound just went.
And I love that the henchman looks genuinely frightened, as no doubt you would be in this situation.
Yeah, I don't know where the sound went, but as you can see here, I agree. It's kind of an advertisement for not the greatest Pontiacs. Is that, I don't know, he's chasing a Bonneville, I think. But again, classic in terms of it's the streets of New York, in terms of, you know, you couldn't do this without kind of that feel. And it's also a great time capsule to kind of see New York at that period of time. So let's stop.
And also Roy Schreider is
Yeah.
so incredible. And, you know, for me, it's between the 7-Ups because of him. And also, I mean, Bill Hickman, because Kerry Lofton, who did the stunts for Bullitt, did that as well. And same with the French Connection. So they brought each other kind of along. And those are two great films. Something that's not on the list, not the Porky Pig thing, which I can't wait to see, but there's a 1976 French film called Rendezvous. And I can't, it's Claude something or other. I can't think of the director's name, but it's basically the point of view of the car, and it goes through the streets of Paris, and it's a Ferrari 275 or something. And all you hear, it's the same thing. It's kind of like Bullitt. You just hear the roar of the motor, but it's a really cool little short film. It's 9 minutes long, I think, but it's really interesting. And it's also a little, you know, kind of one of my favorite little car. And it's not really a full movie, but it's worth checking out. It's awesome.
And there's one other I would mention. It's not a chase per se, but and I hate to bring up the franchise because I might get people throwing virtual tomatoes at me, but the Tokyo Drift and the Fast and Furious segment, a lot of which was filmed in LA. And the reason I mentioned it is because we did an interview. We did a story about the latest one. I did an interview with Tanner Faust. And, you know, there were a lot of things in that movie they wanted to do in CGI. And Tanner, you know, went to the producer and said, no, we can do this. We can actually do this driving. You know, when they swing the car around in the parking garage and bring the bumper within inches of the wall. And unfortunately, so many chases now have become CGI, and you can tell by the way the cars move. There's nothing natural about it. It's one of the things I love about Bullitt. The motion of the vehicles is just so beautiful. And just that so many of these chases we're talking about are a tribute to real driving done with real cars, you know, and it can be done.
Yeah, I think the other one that we would be remiss not to say is To Live and Die in LA is also a very classic kind of car chase LA sequence at the river and everything that you would imagine in terms of kind of telling a story about LA. Kind of shift a little bit and maybe start with you, Aaron, is that, you know, we've worked with you a few times now on some locations in terms of where you're doing stories on often classic cars and wanting to be in kind of classic, you know, locations to help tell that story. Why is that? Why is that important? Which it speaks to us in terms of, you know, one more reason why we need to keep more of historic Los Angeles County intact. But this is another kind of value in terms of how you approach telling stories through MotorTrend.
Yeah, this is how I got to know the Conservancy. You know, so often when we talk about classic cars, we don't get outside of the bubble of the cars themselves. You know, we'll talk about in the car, we'll talk about the competition, you know, competing cars and other vehicles in the lineup of the same manufacturer. But I think you tell a much more complete historical story if you talk about the history and what the context was that buyers were purchasing that cars in. I know that's a poorly worded sentence for a writer to use, but you know, to me, buildings and architecture are such an important part of that because they recreate kind of what were contemporary people looking at. What did the world around them look like at the time they would have purchased the cars that might have influenced that decision? You know, the reason we started this, we did a story. One of the stories I'm most proud of. We got the opportunity to drive a 1949 Volkswagen Beetle. 49 was the first year that Volkswagen came to the US, that 2 Volkswagen Beetles brought over. Those cars are lost. This is a German car that Volkswagen owns, but it is a 49. And this would have been, even though the Volkswagen wasn't a new shape necessarily, you know, it was kind of a 30s design. it would have been a new look for the United States, and I wanted to say, okay, what else were people seeing that was new in 1949? So with the help of the Conservancy, we photographed this car in front of a bunch of 1949 buildings. My friend Mark Malaby, who's an architect, wrote around me, with me, and I basically just reprinted what he said to me. And if you search MotorTrend.com for 1949 Volkswagen Beetle, you'll find that story. There were two of them we did, and I love just putting the cars in that visual context because as individual citizens, we can't affect much of what a city looks like necessarily. We can only maybe have influence maybe a couple of buildings if we're lucky, right? But we paint this backdrop with our cars, by the cars that we choose, the colors, the shapes, and it's kind of our way of adding a little bit to the visual elements of the city, and especially in Los Angeles, which is such a car culture. And I love that scenery. I'm a huge pain in the neck to watch these old movies with because I rewind it a million times to look at the cars or read a road sign or go, hey, was that a Pulsar fastback and things like that. And I think just using the buildings and the Conservancy helping me to just kind of paint that picture of where these cars belonged when they were new.
I love what Aaron said, because that kind of reflects my life growing up with old cars. Like Aaron said, some people are very insulary with oh, it's just the car, that's all they focus on. But for me, when I was 16 and I had the Chevy, it was a gateway drug to all things vintage and amazing about LA. I wanted to play the music that people were listening to in 57. I wanted to wear the clothes they were listening to and drive around and take pictures of my car in front of buildings that would have been there in 1957, or drive roads that felt like time travel. You find that beautiful road lined with palm trees, no other modern cars around. There's a few great neighborhoods. San Marino is a good one. I feel like no one's ever around San Marino and no one parks on the street. So you can get these great kind of time travel experiences driving through. A little bit of Beverly Hills as well. But it's true. The car is just one piece of the whole vintage puzzle for me.
I like that about gateway drug. In terms of, because I think that's very appropriate in terms of what we're talking about here. Well, that leads me to maybe more with you, Bobby, because you went in deep in terms of starting maybe with classic cars, but now classic restaurants and classic places, and just you're a collector in general. So I'm just curious, was it just because of old cars, or what has made you do that? And also, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Formosa Cafe, Idle Hour, and certainly others that you've been involved with. Tel de Pup, certainly you can't get more car culture than that, in making sure that these places are sustained, but mostly being brought back through your work and your partners at 1933 Group.
Yeah, no, it wasn't just cars. Because I was noticing these buildings even before I could drive. I remember I went to Millikan Junior High School in North Hollywood, Studio City, and my parents would drive by the Idle Hour on the way to school. And so I remember just seeing this weird building that kind of weird shape, and wasn't quite sure what it was. And I grew up in an art and design family. And so I think I always had an eye for uniqueness. And so that's why cars are such a attraction for me, because there's so much incredible design and uniqueness in cars. Not all of them, but many of them. And I think I saw the same thing in LA's architecture. You'd see things that you wouldn't see anywhere else and think, what in the world is that? And so when I got started in hospitality, I was opening bars, cafes and bars, but I was kind of recreating these vintage places that didn't ever really exist, but could have existed. The Bigfoot Lodge, it was a log cabin themed bar, could have been built in the 40s, and I was doing several of these. But when I got the call one day about the Idle Hour, which if you don't know, is a giant wooden barrel in North Hollywood. It was built in 1941. And I grew up seeing it, very decrepit. It was painted, it was falling apart. And so when I got a call that it was going to be available, I just had to jump on it. I had to take the chance to do what I'm doing in hospitality, but do it and actually restore a real place. I have a photo of it I can show in case, and just in case you don't know what it looks like. That was it in 1941. There's some great photos of it being built. Look at the cars parked out front. Aren't they great? And then, of course, after a 2-year restoration, that's what it looks like now. And so that led me on a deep, deep rabbit hole of what programmatic architecture is and how programmatic architecture was created because of the automobile. I'll do a plug for my friend Jim Hyman. There's an amazing book called California Crazy. If you don't have this book, you have to get this book, because it is filled with hundreds and hundreds of incredible buildings all around California that were built to attract the motorist. Because before the automobile, you walked by a business or you rode your horse by a business. All that business had to do was hang a sign. You're only going by 2 miles an hour. You're going to see their sign. But once the Model T and the Model A and people were driving, by businesses at 25 miles an hour, business owners were like, nobody is stopping. No one is seeing my sign. I need a bigger sign, and because LA was so young, we had so much empty space. We had dreamers, we had people working in the movie industry, building sets anyway. It was a perfect storm to create these crazy buildings. Something that a motorist could see 2 blocks away. Oh, hey, there's that giant hat, the restaurant. There's a giant ice cream cone. If you go to Idle Hour, while we were building Idle Hour, I got the chance. The Peterson Museum had just started remodeling. And so luckily enough, they were kind enough to donate another programmatic architecture building to me that they had in the museum, but they were changing it out. So we got that building and we moved it to the back patio of the Idle Hour. And I have a picture of that. That is the Bulldog Cafe.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm happy you're talking about it.
Yeah, tamales and ice cream. What a combination, huh? So we were able to get the building and move it and save it, and we have 2 amazing programmatic buildings together. But LA was full of these buildings. They were everywhere, and now they're nowhere. And so luckily, I've been able to save 3. The third one being the Tail of a Pup, which to me, I call it LA's mascot, because when I came here as a kid and we drove around LA, checking out Hollywood, checking out Santa Monica, like you do as a tourist, I remember seeing the Hollywood sign, and I remember seeing some giant hot dog on the side of the road. And that was some of my very first memories. I do have one photo of that as well. There's a great picture of it. What's great about these pictures, you can date them by the cars that are parked there. Yeah. That's a late 60s.
Bobby, is that the original location where it's at now in Santa Monica and La Cienega?
No, the original location was La Cienega Beverly.
Okay.
Where the big Sofitel Hotel is now.
One of the cool things that you have at the Formosa is you have one of the last examples of the red cars. Right?
Yes. This
ties into the automotive world, because I always joke with people that the plot line to the movie Roger Rabbit is essentially, it's kind of true, except for the cartoons and Judge Doom. It was actually Detroit came in, bought up all the public transportation systems, and got people into the whole automotive craze in the late 40s. So,
Michael, I'm so glad you mentioned that movie. I reference that all the time. When I tell people about the red car train and the 110 freeway.
Yeah, and the 110, the 90-degree exits because the cars couldn't go above, 15 miles an hour then. But yeah, I it's such a great movie as far as historical Los Angeles. You take out the cartoons, but it's kind of a true story. There's a true story.
It is a sad true story. And weirdly, the Formosa is a, hugely famous celebrity hangout since the 1930s. I used to hang out there in the 90s a lot when I was in my 20s, and getting to come back and restore that was hugely rewarding. But, one of the things we always do is we hire a researcher and an archivist to do a deep dive on everything about whatever it is we're restoring, whether it's the bowling alley or something else. And we were happy to discover that the train car attached to the Formosa is the oldest surviving red car train that exists. It's from the very first series, which was from 1904 to 1906. Remarkable, early LA history.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, again, thanking Bobby for saving these various places, because they are incredibly rare today, where once there were many of these, every possible wild imagination in terms of a building to look like something that it wasn't, but in like supersized form, to attract a passing driver to stop and spend money. I mean, that was the basic premise. And we only have a handful of these left. So like most recently we lost the Chili Bowl in West Pico. We still have the giant tamale in East LA, but I mean, they're scattered, just remnants at this point. So incredibly significant, but also again, that intersection between automobile, car culture, and architecture, you can't get any more to that. And I would say also moves forward even to when you're talking about like Googie style architecture, the coffee shops, the diners, again, architecture that was intended to stand out and attract people to stop, pull over, spend money, experience the place in a way that otherwise it would, they'd just drive on by. A number of people have asked about the book that you were showing, Bobby. It's California Crazy. It's a great one. There's a number of others out there, but it's definitely.
It's on Taschen, so you can get it. There's Jim Hyman, who wrote it. He's an LA historian. He's collected ephemera on Los Angeles his entire life. He's got a huge archive, and this is actually the I think the third printing of it. It was released, I think, in the 90s, much smaller. Maybe there was a second printing, but this one is huge. This one is, I mean, it's a coffee table book, and it is packed full of these incredible places. Anyway, it's all worn out. You have to spill coffee on it. I mean, this thing lives on my coffee table, and I show people all the time. Well, since we're talking about books, I'll plug one other book, because this is one of my other LA passions, and that's for vintage racing. And I do a lot of vintage racing. I compete. I do the Bonneville Salt Flats. I do a lot of exhibition racing, drag racing, but there's a great book called Where They Raced. And this is all based in Los Angeles. And believe it or not, California had more racetracks than any other state in the entire country. It's something that we have brushed under the rug as far as California history goes. It's kind of like our dark little secret, but we had so much racing. There was a famous race car driver named Barney Oldfield. He was kind of America's first race car driver, because Henry Ford had designed this car in the early 1900s. It's called the 999 car. And it was so early that it didn't even have a steering wheel. Like it was kind of like, well, we're creating these machines, and nothing's been standardized yet, right? So what it had was a kind of a tiller. It had this bar with two handles on it. It was more of a tiller. And Henry Ford wanted to race this car. He wanted to show the Chevrolet brothers that he could be really, really fast. And so there were no race car drivers that existed at that time. What there were bicycle racers, guys racing velodromes and stuff on bicycles. So Henry Ford goes to Barney Oldfield, who's a bicycle racer, and says, do you think you could pilot this thing? Since you go fast? He's like, sure, I can do it. Sure enough, there's a famous race and he wins. And so Barney became the most famous, one of the most famous people in the world at the time, you know, for his racing. And he was quite a character, became a huge celebrity. He ended up, after his retirement, ended up owning bars and restaurants here in Los Angeles, believe it or not. But I built a bar as a tribute to Barney in Culver City called Old Fields Liquor Room. And that is a tribute to Barney, who's buried in Culver City Cemetery, and who also raced the Culver City board track. The Culver City board track was one of the biggest, next to the Beverly Hills board track and the Playa del Rey board track. We had 3 really big board tracks here in the 20s. And we had amazing races. And, you know, look into it a little more, look about all the different races we had in LA. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, you think of the introduction of the early hot rods, or even like Hot Wheels cars, all Southern California, LA area. So there's a ton of heritage. As anticipated, fully, we would hit that hour mark very quickly without any problem in terms of sharing lots of information. So first of all, I want to thank you 3. And maybe before we wrap up, and I'll do some closing here, is and maybe you have multiple, but what's your classic car that you have now? So let's start with Aaron again.
I have a bunch of crappy old classic cars fitting my crappy crappy first car, but I've got an old 69 Dodge sedan. I've got a big diesel Suburban, 83 diesel Suburban, and an 89 CRX, Honda CRX, that needs a complete restoration. So altogether, a collection worth hundreds of dollars.
I'm sure the Peterson will be contacting you shortly to try to acquire it. How about Bobby?
I like many have a car and motorcycle collection. I think I'm up to about 35 vehicles now. But let's see, I'll skip over a lot. One of my favorites, I built a 1933 Ford Roadster that is a tribute to the 1933 Ford stock car races that Henry Ford created. He wanted to promote his new V8 in 1933, and he created these stock car races. One of them was held at Mines Field, which is now LAX.
Wow.
And one of them was at Ascot, which was also near Gilmore. Gilmore, next to the Hollywood Farmers Market, where CBS now is. It was an amazing racetrack called Gilmore. But my latest car, one of my favorites, because it's a car that I wanted in high school, and it was always out of reach and never quite attainable, was I was able to get a 1955 Porsche Speedster.
Oh yeah.
And it's a nice old kind of sweaty one, not restored or anything. So I've been driving that a lot.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And Michael, do you have anything other than, not other, but I mean, the Bullitt is pretty good.
I mean, like, because of the Mopar connection, I've always had a second car, always had Jeeps, but the Bullitt Mustang is my daily driver right now. I've had my eyes for a while on, I really want to get a, going way back, a Model T Speedster, because I feel like a lot of those older cars, I don't know why they're not more valuable than they are, but they're still out there, and most people have hot rodded them out, but you can find the unmolested versions. That I just want to get a hold of some of that, because I remember as a kid going to the Henry Ford Museum, which probably one of the better museums in the world, and there's an exhibit where you can build a Model T. They take it apart, and then they have kids just put it together in a matter of minutes, like literally an example of the to show people how an assembly line works. And so ever since then, I've always wanted my own version, but I love the Speedster just because that's what Henry Ford used to race. But before I sign off, I do want to put a plug in for the Steve McQueen car show. It's the Friends of Steve McQueen car show. It's actually this Sunday at over at the Boys Republic in Chino. And if you're a fan of Steve McQueen or vintage cars, it's one of the better car collections as far as car shows go. Everything from vintage motorbikes to rare Porsches. You'll have the Southern California Bullitt Club there with all kinds of examples of Bullitt Mustangs, even the modern tributes with the 2001, 2008, and 2018 versions. But it's a charity, so all the money, all the proceeds, the silent auction, everything goes to the Boys Republic, which is the home that Steve McQueen spent his childhood at. He was basically raised there. So Peterson is involved. Usually the Peterson Museum brings out Steve's XKSS, the 56 Jag, the Green Rat, as they call it. So if you're a fan of movies, Steve McQueen, it's the best car show that I know of that I've ever been to. And it's a great event on the 2nd. So check it out. If you're in the area, wear sunscreen because it's hot.
No, thank you. The link is in the chat. And then I drive a 70 VW Beetle. So we all have something in common: cars, places, architecture. So again, thank you, all of you, for everything you do on your normal day-to-day kinds of stuff, but also for being with us today. And thanks everybody for joining us either now or those that are going to be watching the recording. We appreciate you tuning in. Again, this is with the LA Conservancy, our People Plus Places series. And again, if you want to see the full Bullitt car chase in all of its glory, please come on out on June 8th to the LA Theater. Go to our website, laconservancy.org, if you need to buy tickets for the Bullitt screening. Would be the matinee, or any other film. So appreciate you being here, and thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been great. Thank you.